Women are powerful creators. The Align Women podcast features female entrepreneurs, leaders, and other professional women who've demonstrated agency and innovation in their personal and professional lives. I'm your host, Amy Evans. I have authentic, intimate conversations with my guests that highlight their paths to success, their struggles and accomplishments, and the things that currently excite, motivate, and inspire them to turn their visions into reality. Welcome to the Align Women podcast. I'm Amy Evans, your host and the founder of Align Women, a leadership and networking organization for professional women. This podcast features female entrepreneurs, leaders, and other professional women who've demonstrated agency and innovation in their personal and professional lives. With me today is Lauren Katunich. Lauren is a partner at Rains Feldman, and she specializes in labor and employment law. She's also one of the founding members of the very first Align Women Networking Mastermind. Welcome, Lauren.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. I'm glad to be here.
I am so excited to have you. You are a wealth of information, and I want to talk with you first about what you do as a labor and employment lawyer. There's a commonality in what you and I do in that while it can seem very transactional, there's a human element to employment law, obviously, when it's dealing with employees, and sometimes even a public relations element to it in terms of how an employer wants a certain situation to be perceived. And that makes your practice anything but black and white and transactional. And I've heard you describe what you do as dealing with human complexities, which is a simple way to describe something that's super complex. So tell me what makes that field of law interesting to you.
Well, it's interesting because number one, it's never boring, right? You're dealing with, so in the employment world, we do a couple of different things. Obviously, there are some black and white issues. The wage and hour issues are very black and white. Unless, of course, there's not a defined law. But when we're talking about things like harassment, discrimination, how to communicate layoffs, how to communicate promotions, you have to be able to tap into what other people are thinking. And sometimes that's easier said than done. And you try and get a sense because people look at their own circumstances through their own lens. And so somebody thinks that they're communicating in a professional way and that they're being completely above board. And somebody else may perceive that as something that is, that they're being unprofessional, that perhaps they're picking up on cues that person didn't intend to give. So the complexities of it makes it just really interesting because there's never a dull day. You'll have a conversation. Sometimes we'll do workplace investigations and we'll get in and you'll see literally that 5 different people can perceive the same exact conversation in 5 different ways. And so figuring out where the truth is in that circumstance, figuring out how to respond to those circumstances, what's going to set somebody off in a way that you don't want to do, how to kind of bridge gaps and bridge relationships. So it's a really nuanced area of law, and it makes it always makes it interesting. There's never a dull moment, and some of the stories that we hear are, will make your head spin, frankly.
And it is always interesting to talk with you and hear what's happening sort of on the ground. And let's talk about what hopefully isn't a defining moment in your employment law career, but certainly has had a massive impact on you this year, which is the pandemic and how that's affected the employer-employee relationship and really brought an entirely new issue to deal with that probably didn't have a lot of precedent to it. So tell me what you are seeing, how you're seeing the pandemic impact the employee relationship. And also I'm curious with your crystal ball, what you see as probably permanent changes that employers have had to make, in the moment to deal with this, but that may be permanent going forward.
Well, I mean, this has been an incredibly challenging time. I think that all of us, personally understand that it's an incredibly challenging time. Professionally, it's been an incredibly challenging time for me in terms of trying to learn the new laws, trying to be able to digest them in a way that I can then tell them to somebody else. And so if you could imagine how difficult it is for me, you have to imagine how difficult it is for an employer, right? And then as difficult it is for an employer, you have to imagine how difficult it is for an employee that has to live through those changes. So it has been a very challenging time. It's interesting. And again, there's not a lot of precedent in the law for a lot of the things that are happening. And so a lot of this it goes back to just the complexity of this is what we think the best answer is, and this is how we think it's going to be interpreted. And then in terms of what we see, so we're finding that employers are trying to navigate this. They're trying to navigate this the best they can. There are going to be some mess ups along the way, either because, look, everyone's kind of in this, it was a shock moment, right? It happened so quickly that people didn't really anticipate, nor could they have anticipated. And even to this day, with the openings and reopenings and closings and reclosings, it's very challenging. So even though it's getting a little bit easier, it's still very challenging every day. And so in terms of the employer-employee relationships, what I'm seeing a lot of is you're getting a lot of everything on every side. And I think that's true with everything in employment law. We feel like there's always going to be someone that takes advantage of a situation. So sometimes we'll find situations where, an employee might take advantage of a situation. Sometimes we'll find situations where employers are not being as lenient as they should be. And it's really about finding that delicate balance and trying to figure out what's the right way to go. In terms of the changes that I see that are going to be permanent, I think that we will probably be seeing a lot of Zoom and a lot of the virtual for a very long time. I think that people have realized that there is the ability to work from home, not to battle traffic. So there's the issues with telecommuting, but then the issues with telecommuting raise a whole bunch of other issues in the employment world. So, for example, there's the wage an hour, making sure that people are compensated for every hour that they work if they're working from home and you're not really there to kind of clock them in and clock them out in the same typical and traditional way. So, I see that as a change. I just see that there's a lot of innovation. I think people are trying to figure out what's their lane. How can they keep people coming in? So we have a lot of restaurant clients that are, trying to come up with new and creative ways to get people actually, to come and dine outdoors. I have been really impressed with the level of creativity that I've seen from employers. I think it's refreshing, and as scary as this is for everybody, I think it's been, in some ways there's been some benefits that have come out of it.
For sure. As I was sort of alluding to in that question, I think there are some good things that are hopefully going to endure, like the work from home piece and the creativity about dining outdoors. I'm certainly enjoying some of the places I'm going to where I get to sit outside, and I never have before.
Yeah.
So we'll see what lasts. Along those lines, one of the questions I really like to ask my guests is, what do you wish more people understood about what you do? And as we were preparing for the show, you told me that you wish more people understood that you don't make the laws. And as simple as that seems, and as obvious as that seems, I imagine that is something that you continually have to remind your clients and your prospective clients. Tell me how that comes up in the work that you do, and where it can be a challenge to remind clients that you're not the one who's defining these things.
So, here in California, we have most of the laws here are very favorable to employees, and they're interpreted in a way that's very favorable to employees. And I not to necessarily say that that's a bad thing. I want to start from that. I do think that sometimes there's opportunities to kind of take advantage of that. But what's difficult is that you try and explain to someone and they think, well, I'm paying somebody well, I'm paying them everything I told them I was going to pay them. This is what they bargained for. This is what they agreed to. What do you mean I still owe them more money?
Mhm.
So it's the having to explain to people that just because you have agreed to something, if it's not compliant with what the law requires,
Mm.
there's going to be potential liability there. It's the same with when we do a lot of wage and hour work, a lot of class action work, and a lot of times employers, for example, think that they're being flexible. Well, I don't make my employees take meal breaks or rest breaks. If they want to take them, they take them. I don't stop them. I let them do what I want to do. And explaining to people that, yes, I understand that you think in your way that you're treating somebody like an adult and allowing them to make a decision about when they want to take a break or whether they want to take a break at all, but that's not the way that the law looks at it. And I feel that sometimes there is a lot of pushback from clients. I think that once they've been through it, they realize how important it is to comply to, right down to the letter of the law with virtually everything. And then even sometimes complying with the letter of the law down to, the dotting your I's and crossing your T's still won't necessarily change you or change the facts that there could be potential, cases that come forward.
Yeah, you and I've had lots of conversations about employment law issues, and um, your I understand your desire and the human resources consultants' desire to get employers to understand that the more that you can put in place before you have a problem, the more you are preventing challenges and expense in the future. And in California, that's so complicated to navigate, and there are so many things that I think employers think, well, if it's not a problem right now, I'm just not gonna, like, putting all of these checks and balances in place is so onerous. I'm just gonna cross my fingers and hope that nothing bad happens. And
that's really the thing that I try and impress upon people is that it pays to have an ounce of prevention, right? It's if you think on it on the front end and you put the systems in place and you invest in the handbooks and you invest in making sure that you've classified people properly, if you invest in making sure that you're doing it properly, and that, or if you want to terminate somebody who has been a problematic employee, and making sure that you've documented it and making sure that you've done everything that you need to do, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to potentially face some litigation in the future, but it's going to be less painful. And, the one thing I will say is that litigation and being in the world that I'm in, unfortunately, I work with clients and I love them. I want to help them grow their business, but it is expensive, and it's expensive to have employees, and it's expensive to do it wrong. And so doing it right from the get-go and making sure that you're complying to the best that you can is the most important thing to really do to avoid sort of the shock of what comes down the road if you're not doing that.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I there's a new tagline for you. If you think it's expensive to do it right, try doing it wrong.
I like that. I'm gonna put that on my. I'm gonna start putting that on the bottom of my email.
Right, that's your email signature. Perfect.
My email signature. Thank you, Amy. Thank you. You're just a wealth of. You're a giver.
You know what? I got Align Women's tagline from somebody else. So sometimes somebody else puts it in a way that you go, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to say.
I like that. I think that's the right way to do it. And usually what there's that saying that someone will say that, after something goes wrong, you find religion. Like, people will find religion, right? Like, you get sued once and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. I was just kind of dealing with people with, I'm not going to make this overly formal. I'm not going to, look, we have this good relationship. And then all of a sudden they look back and they're like, okay, maybe I should have done it differently. And hopefully by the next time they find religion, which is, in this case, basically learning to make sure that they comply with all of the things that we tell them to comply with.
Right. Yep. So I want to shift gears for a second. You are in a field that is traditionally male dominated in law. And even though there are more women coming into your profession, there are also a lot of women who are leaving. And you are a successful partner at a Los Angeles law firm, which is
one of the things I love about you. What is one thing that you think other successful women can be doing to pave the way for new women who are entering your field?
So the interesting thing about the field of law is that if you actually look at the graduation rates for women coming out of law school, I think that, and I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but I believe that women actually graduate from law school at a rate greater than men. But the number of partners and the number of equity partners as compared to men is significantly decreased. And, a part of that is the field itself, but it's also just society in general in terms of the value of the work that, women put in. And when, for example, somebody has a family, the expectation that the woman takes the time off from work, which can also be stifling to the trajectory of a career. Right. And those are things that we all battle against, right? It's something that there's no one solution to, right? I think that it'd be really easy to say that there'd be one solution, but it's not. I mean, it's societal. We have to look at what the value of it is, and we have to kind of look at the long term. And so I think that obviously there's issues with, you want to keep women involved, and you want to keep them involved in a way that they can actually get to being the equity partners, like myself, so that they're making the rules and so that they're making the decisions, and bringing a different and unique perspective. Because the thing about it is that it's really important in order to be able to grow and to grow in your own professional career. You have to be able to look at all of the doors that are available and open to you. And so whether that means taking some additional time off when having children, whether that means having support systems in place, so that women can actually grow and continue to not have to necessarily take a step back. And also, though, the one thing I was going to say is that there's not necessarily anything wrong with taking a step back. Right. And then I think we have to kind of change our mindset of, okay, someone took a step back. Well, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to get back in it, right? So there could be women that took off a couple of years because they wanted to have kids or for whatever personal reasons. And then, right now there seems like such a barrier to reentry. So the barrier to entry has kind of gone away in a lot of ways, but the barrier to reentry is probably more significant. I mean, there's still obviously a barrier to entry, but I feel like we're kind of easing into that. Mm-hmm. But I still think that there's just a view of when women take the time off. So, it's supporting women in that role. And I feel very fortunate that every place that I've worked in, I have felt that people have been supportive. I took the natural amount of time off when I had kids, but I didn't necessarily take the years off. Mm-hmm. And, but I recognize that different people make different choices that's right for them. And I think we need to be accepting of that. And I think we need to encourage people to get back in when the time is right.
That's a really interesting observation, that the barrier to entry isn't necessarily there, but the barrier to re-entry is still there. And I wonder, as we watch this new work from home environment play out and become more permanent, for lack of a better word, if that will ease that barrier a little bit, because people will feel more comfortable working from home and being engaged. And not feeling so much like, well, I have to show up at 7 a.m. and I can't leave until 7 p.m. That brings up an entirely different conversation about whether you can actually be a functioning full-time person and school your children while they're at home with you.
Let's just be very clear for anyone that. I mean, I've been very fortunate in the sense that I've had childcare, and to be honest with you, I don't think I could have done this without that. Yeah. It's absolutely unacceptable that we expect people, especially women, to be able to teach their kids, go to work. It's too much. It's too much, and so that's why it's important, I think, that we have women in leadership positions that are able to kind of take a break and say, like, look, there's all of these things that are happening, and perhaps other people don't recognize what's happening in somebody's household because they don't see it.
Yeah.
They don't see what's happening. And, I would say one of the things that I've found actually somewhat freeing about working from home is that I used to never actually say if I couldn't take something because I had to pick my kids up or something. I would never really say, well, I can't because of the kids. I would rather not say anything at all. But I found it a little bit freeing, I will say, to be able to say, like, look, I don't have childcare. If you want to take a call at 4:30, that's fine, but you're going to probably listen to kids in the background. And like I never would have done that before.
Yeah.
And I think that you're just kind of like, at this point you have, you just have to be real. You have to be real with it. And either people appreciate that or they don't. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a level, my experience has been that there's a level of authenticity about the way people show up that is, it's different than it was before, because you don't sort of put your suit on, and I kind of mean suit of armor as much as I mean suit of, work suit. You don't put your suit on and your game face on and show up in another place where you leave the rest of your life behind. Your life is running around behind you all the time. And that requires a level of authenticity that I personally absolutely adore. It is one of my favorite parts about this whole crazy thing is that people show up in a different way. It's not all for the women, we don't all do our hair and makeup and everything and put our pretty designer clothes on anymore. I mean, I have a handbag collection I haven't touched in about 6 months. Like, I'm not going anywhere to take my handbags out with me. And I love that. So it's complicated.
It's very complicated. And, look, there's still that fine line, I will say the other thing that I find interesting about this time is that people really expect you to be available more because, you aren't commuting. So it's kind of like, oh, where's the turnaround? Where's the turnaround? Which has been challenging in some ways, because you're like, I still have other things going on, but it feels like everyone thinks that you're so much more accessible because you're at home. Like, oh, you're not getting ready. You're not going anywhere. You're just sitting at home. Yeah. And that makes it somewhat challenging too. But in some ways you are more accessible. So I think that I do think that one of the things, going back to the original question about keeping women in the field a lot, is that the flexibility is really important. Like, to me, I can basically work during the day and then I shut down when it's time to have dinner with the kids, and then they go to bed, and then I pick it all up back again. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that giving people flexibility is actually a good thing. You can get the same things accomplished. And I think that's how you keep women engaged, is that you keep them in a role where they have the flexibility to make the determination as to what works for them.
Yes. Yeah. One of the ways I summarize that is manage the work and not the people. And I've certainly worked in environments where it was much more about managing the people. It's 8 o'clock. Are you at your desk yet? It's 5 o'clock. Why aren't you at your desk? And being able to say, here's the project we need done. Here's the date by which it needs to be done. Here are the parameters in which it needs to be done. Is that a project that you can take on? Great. And then let them go. If you want to do it at 10 at night or at 7 in the morning, if you're most productive here, if you want to take time there, I love that. I think that is a healthy development in the employment space. And that flexibility, as long as people aren't pressured and, aren't taking on more than they can really accomplish, I think that's an advantage. And I'd like to see that continue.
Yeah.
I would love to ask you about, so we talked about sort of what we can do from the outside to make the environment more accommodating to women. And there are certainly things that we can do individually on the inside. And I asked you what's one of the hardest lessons you've had to learn, and what you said so resonated with me. And I think it'll resonate with a lot of women that are listening. You said the cost for my time is worth it. It's been hard to learn that the cost for my time is worth it. I struggle with telling people that what my hourly rate is and wait for them to push back that it's too high. And I'm already getting ready to discount my worth before I'm even asked what it is. Oh my goodness. That is like, that just hits me to the bone. What that process is like. That's so familiar to me. Tell me what that's been like for you as you have progressed through your legal career, and I'm presuming have moved into positions where your hourly rate is higher and higher as you go on. What has that been like for you?
It's challenging because I think, first of all, I was just raised in a way that I look at every dollar that I charge somebody as the same thing. Can I look somebody in the eye and say, hey, it was a value add for you, right? And I had to realize that, look, not everything you do as a lawyer is always going to be a value add. There's some of the grunt work, the leg work, the things that you don't really want to have to do that you have to do because it needs to get done, right?
Yeah.
But it's been sort of an eye-opening experience for me, because every time I look at a rate, I'm always ready to discount it. I mean, it's kind of my like, someone's going to ask me for a discount. I have to be prepared. And I recently had actually a client. She's one of the in-house attorneys for a large client of mine, and we had a lunch after a mediation. And she basically said to me, she said, Lauren, you are a value. She said, at your rate, we hire big firms all the time. We have, we've seen it all. And your rate, number one, your rate's a value. Number two, I can tell that you don't overbill, and that's a value. And I have to go back and I have to say to myself, okay, everybody knows that lawyers are expensive. So on some level, I have to recognize that if somebody can't afford it, then there's probably going to be a more junior person that they can afford, perhaps at a different firm. Perhaps they have different needs. They don't have as complicated of issues that they need our help with. But it's that people will value your work if you do. Sorry.
It's totally okay.
People will value your work if you do good work. And that you do the work, you charge for your time, and at the end of the day, somebody comes back and thinks to themselves, well, look, that was not a value add, or it was not what I was anticipating, then you deal with it. But you start off by not discounting your value. Right. And that is a very, very, very hard thing to say. And I will tell you right now, I don't think I know any men that start off that way. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with a male lawyer where it's like, well, this is my rate, but I will discount it. It's a very woman thing to do. And I don't know why we're wired that way. And it's upsetting, but at the same time, there's people like you that have, you have been a champion of always like know your worth. And so you're kind of my, you kind of pushed me in that direction. So thank you.
I appreciate that. It is a fundamental piece of Align Women that women feel their worth from a financial standpoint. And I think that bringing those conversations out in the open is really important. I don't think we lead with money conversations and revenue conversations as often as we can to normalize it and to make it feel more comfortable. And there's so much in what you said. It's a whole other podcast episode, but having a woman who can advocate for you, like the woman who validated for you that what you were doing had value. I think that's really important. And I think recognizing that we are socialized in a different way than men. We're socialized to prove our value. We would probably rather do it on the back end, right? I want to do a really good job. I want to do a perfect job. I want to show how much I'm worth. And then on the back end, I'll tell them how much it costs. And I will have already shown them what the value is so that they'll feel more comfortable paying for it, as opposed to setting it on the front end. We want to be liked. There's a lot to that. The book, How Women Rise, deconstructs some value and money in our professional lives. It's just like the previous conversation we had. There's a lot of influences on that. But I think I think what you shared is something that a lot of women can relate to. And I appreciate you being willing to have that conversation, because I think that it's an important one to have. And I could talk with you all day long. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. It has been absolutely delightful having you here today.
Well, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. It's great to see your face.
Thank you. Where can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you?
So I am at Rains Feldman. We are located in Century City, and I think all my contact information will be kept in the notes, correct?
It will indeed. And reach out to Lauren if you have questions about employment law issues. She is an absolutely amazing resource, and it's been really a joy to have you on today. And look for more episodes with more amazing women at alignwomenpodcast.com.
Thanks for listening to the Align Women Podcast. You can find more episodes with more amazing women at alignwomenpodcast.com, and visit alignwomen.org to learn more about our leadership and networking organization. This is Amy Evans, and you've been listening to the Align Women Podcast.